The wedding dress was soaked in rain and blood, clinging to her like a ghost that refused to let go. The sheriff knelt beside her, hat trembling in his hands, eyes wide with something between guilt and disbelief. "You knew," she whispered, voice raw as the storm behind them. He didn't answer. Couldn't. The letter she had carried across 3 states lay torn at her feet, ink running in the mud. It had promised a new life, safety, love. Instead, it brought her face to face with the man who had gunned down her father in cold blood. A single shot echoed moments later. But whose finger had pulled the trigger? Before we jump back and unravel how it all led to this moment, go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you love dark romance, secrets buried under dusty plains, and stories where justice and vengeance collide, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what comes next. Dust clung to everything in Dry Creek. The windows, the horses. Even the clouds overhead seemed made of it, soft and gray and slow to move. It coated the wooden slats of the saloon porch and turned boots the color of old parchment. It drifted through open windows and settled on unopened letters, like the one she kept in the drawer by her bedside. Clara Walsh stood at the edge of the post road, her traveling bag in one hand, a folded parasol in the other. She didn't open the parasol, hadn't for years. Her skin, weathered and pale, bore its own armor now. The sun had kissed her the way it kissed the land here, without love or mercy. She had arrived 3 days ago. No one welcomed her. Dry Creek wasn't the kind of town that rolled out banners or baked pies for new faces, especially not ones like hers. Not with her strange, off-kilter walk and the heavy scarf she always wore, no matter the heat. She didn't speak much, not because she was shy, but because she couldn't hear what most people said unless they were close. She had learned to lip-read in the orphanage. That, and how to disappear. And in Dry Creek, she was already half invisible. The children stared from behind fences. The men tipped their hats but quickly turned away. The women? They whispered. Always whispered. Behind gloved hands. In corners of the churchyard. Inside the mercantile where Clara's presence felt like an offense just by breathing the same air. "Mail order bride," someone muttered near the general store. "For Sheriff Holt. Why would he pick her? She's not right. Look how she walks. Did you see that scarf? Probably hiding something." Clara didn't answer them. She never did. Her silence only made the rumors worse. But what could she say? That she walked with a limp because a fire had collapsed half her childhood home and crushed her leg when she was 10. That the scarf hid a long, jagged scar stretching from her collarbone to behind her ear. That she was mostly deaf in one ear and entirely so in the other? Or maybe that she'd been promised to Sheriff Holt in letters, dozens of them exchanged over half a year. Letters that spoke of peace and kindness, and starting again. She kept those letters tied in ribbon inside her leather satchel. They were more alive than the people she passed on the street. The boarding house where she stayed was cold even in the July heat. Miss Felda, the keeper, was polite in the way people are when they want you gone, but aren't sure how to say it. She knocked once every morning with lukewarm tea and hard bread. Clara would nod her thanks. Sometimes she caught Miss Felda looking at her with a kind of distant sorrow, as if trying to place her in a memory long buried. On the 4th morning, Clara stood at the mirror. Her wedding dress, simple cream-colored muslin with lace along the cuffs, hung beside the bed. She hadn't dared wear it yet. Not until the sheriff came for her. He hadn't. Not once. Not a single knock on her door. She stared at herself in the glass. The light from the window caught the edge of the scar beneath her scarf. She touched it, lightly, out of habit. The way someone might trace a lock they've never opened. This was not how it was supposed to feel. He had written her of horses and spring wind, of books by the fire, and the way his mother used to hum when she baked cornbread. He had promised her a home. But what Clara had found was a town where shadows clung longer than light, and where every soul seemed to carry a secret too heavy to speak aloud. She took to walking the edge of the town, where the land fell into low hills and thorn brush. The wind there was softer, kinder. It didn't ask questions, didn't whisper behind her back. Sometimes she would kneel by the river and press her hand to the soil. It reminded her she was still here, still real. In town, though, she wasn't. Clara, she was that girl, the bride, the one with the limp, the one he hasn't claimed, and perhaps worse, the one who never smiled. But how could she? She had smiled once, before the fire. She had smiled once, before her father was shot on the county road outside Austin, left for dead beside the wheel of their broken wagon. The law had said it was a bandit ambush, just another robbery. But Clara had remembered the badge, the black hat, the silver star, the man who turned away after the gun went off. They said memory played tricks, but hers had stayed sharp, like the sound of a scream she couldn't quite hear but never forgot. On the 5th day, she went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Holt was gone. The deputy, a boy no older than 20, scratched at his neck and looked anywhere but her face. "He's out on the trail," he said, "chasing some cattle thieves near Mesa Hill." "When will he be back?" she asked. Her voice cracked. Her lips barely moved. The boy shrugged. "Hard to say. Sheriff goes quiet sometimes. Even we don't always know." Clara turned without another word and walked back into the dust. Behind her, the door creaked closed like a sigh. Each night she sat by the window and reread his last letter, the one that asked her to come, the one where he called her darlin' for the first time. He had drawn a map, a crude sketch of the town, the boarding house, the sheriff's station, the church. She traced the lines with a finger, memorized every curve. But nowhere on the map did it mention what she had begun to feel, that the truth here had layers, like dry paint on a coffin lid. Something about this town felt wrong, not loud and dangerous. Quietly wrong, the kind of wrong that settled in people's bones. And then one morning, it happened. She was walking past the barber's when 2 old men stopped talking as she approached. One of them, a wiry man with a fading tattoo on his forearm, leaned back and said too loud, "You know who her pa was, right?" The other squinted. "No. Robert Walsh. Fella got gunned down by a lawman near Austin 'bout 8 years back." Clara froze. The wind died. Sheriff who did it wore a black hat. Ain't many men did back then. The second man's eyes widened. "Sheriff Holt?" The first man just nodded and spat into the dirt. Clara's heart slammed against her chest. Her legs felt hollow. Her throat burned. She turned and walked away without a word, but inside her head, everything screamed. The veil she had packed for the wedding shook in her hands that night. She didn't know if it was anger or heartbreak, or something in between. The sheriff had promised her a future, but she had come chasing it, only to find the past waiting with a gun. The wind changed the morning the stranger rode in. Clara noticed it before anyone else. Not the man, but the wind. It didn't carry the dry rattle of brush or the sharp grit of sand. It had something else in it, like smoke, like stories. He arrived without ceremony. No one saw him come through the canyon pass, but by noon his horse stood tethered outside the saloon, and his boots tapped across the boardwalk with the kind of rhythm that drew eyes and held them. He wasn't dressed, like most men in Dry Creek. No polished badge, no oilskin duster, just a dark vest, sleeves rolled, and a gun that looked more worn than dangerous, the kind of weapon that had been used often and with quiet purpose. His face was tan from the sun, jaw strong, lips set, but not cruel. His eyes, well, they were the color of dust just before dusk, warm, unreadable, and patient. Clara was on the steps of the church when she saw him. He didn't gawk. Didn't flinch at her limp or stare at her scarf like others did. He just nodded. A quiet, respectful nod, and something in her chest shifted. Not a quake, not a storm, just a shift, like the earth making room for a seed it hadn't expected. They crossed paths again 2 days later at the Mercantile. She was reaching for a jar of preserves on a high shelf when it slipped from her hand. Before it hit the ground, he caught it. She blinked. He offered it back. Hard reach for someone with one hand full of tea.
His voice was low, almost soft. Not what she expected.
It wasn't coated with flirtation or mockery, just a sentence, a shared moment, a bridge built with wood instead of stone. Clara took the jar, nodded her thanks, and turned away. But the warmth of his eyes lingered longer than his words. By the next morning, the town had begun to hum with curiosity. Who is he? Stranger don't say much. Checked into Miss Felda's boarding house, room 4, across the hall from her. She'd better be careful. Some said he was a bounty hunter. Others whispered outlaw, a man running from a hanging or toward one. Clara said nothing. She didn't even know his name. But that night, she sat by her window longer than usual, watching the moonlight crawl across the wooden slats and listening for the creak of his boots. She never heard them. But somehow, she slept easier. The next day was market day. Clara rarely went. The crowd made it harder to read lips, harder to hear the few voices she could catch. But this time, something pulled her there. He was at the far end, standing near a stall of tools and lanterns, examining a rusted horseshoe as if it were a relic. Clara kept her distance, but then, as if sensing her, he looked up. This time he walked toward her. They stood face to face between rows of peaches and bolts of cloth. "I'm Nathan," he said. She hesitated. Then, "Clara." He nodded again, gently. "I know. People talk," she said, not as an accusation. "They always do," he replied. She started to walk away, but he stopped her, not with his hands, but with his voice. "Do you believe what they say?" She turned. "Which part?" "That. I'm dangerous, or that you are." She studied him. "You don't seem dangerous." "Neither do you." For a moment, they simply stood there, wrapped in silence that felt more honest than anything spoken all week. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. The town didn't like it. Not one bit. 2 outsiders. One a mail-order bride with a past cloaked. In scars, the other a man who hadn't offered a last name. The tension didn't come from what they said. It came from the way they looked at each other. The quiet understanding. The pause before goodbye. It unsettled Dry Creek. "Not right," muttered old Ms. Wilkins. "She ain't even married yet and she's looking at another man." "Maybe she's got tricks," another sneered. "That's why Holt hasn't claimed her." But there was another rumor rising now. One carried more in narrowed eyes than in words. Some believed the stranger had come not for supplies, but for Clara. On the 6th night, the silence broke. She heard footsteps outside her door. Slow even, a knock. Not the sheriff, not Miss Felda. She knew their rhythms. When she opened it, Nathan stood there holding a tin cup of coffee. "For you," he said. She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. They didn't speak for a while. He sat near the window. She sat near the door. The coffee sat between them, untouched. Finally, she asked, "Why are you here, Nathan?" His eyes met hers, steady and without smoke. "I'm looking for something. Maybe someone." She waited. "Justice," he said. Her breath caught. Not from the word, but the way he said it. Like a man who'd once believed in it and lost faith but kept going anyway. "You won't find much of that here," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But sometimes justice looks like something else. Like truth." Clara's fingers curled around her scarf. "What if truth hurts more than the lie?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "Then it was probably worth finding." The next morning, Deputy Morris found a dead calf on the edge of town, throat slit, no footprints, no trail. Later that day, someone found a threatening note nailed to Miss Felda's boarding house. "We don't take kindly to spies, strangers, or snake-hearted women." Nathan read it silently. Clara watched his jaw tighten. "Doesn't sound like justice to me," he said. "No," she replied. "It sounds like fear." That evening, the church bell rang off time. A signal, a fire maybe, or something worse. Clara and Nathan stood side by side as people gathered outside the saloon. Sheriff Holt had returned. He was dusted from trail riding, shirt stained with sweat, revolver slung loose at his hip. He stood tall, straight, still. Wearing the black hat, when he saw Clara, he froze. Their eyes met. Hers were hollow with rage. His were full of something else. Recognition or regret. Nathan watched the whole thing. Clara didn't move. The sheriff broke eye contact first. That night, Nathan didn't knock. He stood across the hall, leaning against the doorframe of his own room, watching her in silence. "I saw him once," she finally said, voice barely above breath. "The man who killed my father." Nathan waited. He wore a black hat, like that. Same build, same eyes. She looked down. "They said it was bandits, but I saw the badge." Nathan stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she felt it. "You sure it was him?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I was a child. Children remember pain more than faces." He didn't argue. He didn't comfort. He simply stood with her. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Dry Creek, Clara didn't feel alone. Clara stood in the church doorway, her scarf tugged tight around her throat. The townsfolk were already seated, murmuring, fanning their faces despite the chill. She felt their eyes claw over her as she stepped inside. A mail-order bride, a limping woman, a mystery wrapped in silence and soft fabric. At the front, Sheriff Holt stood beside the preacher, hands clasped loosely, hat in hand. He wore black. Of course he did. Clara's heart beat too fast. Every step down the aisle felt like walking toward her own gallows. She had agreed to this wedding months ago, back when Holt had only been a name in a letter, a man with stability, land, law. Her past had felt like a prison then. This marriage was supposed to be the key. Now she wasn't sure which cell she was walking into. But the wedding didn't happen, not that day, because someone had been waiting, and they'd brought the past with them. It happened when the preacher asked her to step forward. Clara raised her eyes, just briefly, and saw a face in the crowd she hadn't seen in years. Delia Moore. She had known Clara before the scar, before the fire, before the whispers. Delia's voice sliced through the stillness like a blade. "She ain't no bride," she called out, rising. "She's a liar." Gasps, murmurs. Sheriff Holt stiffened. The preacher looked to Clara, confused. Delia's lips curled. Her daddy wasn't just shot by outlaws. He was one, the worst. She comes from a family of murderers and thieves. You marry her, and you'll curse this town. Clara didn't speak. Couldn't. Her legs buckled. No one helped her. Not Holt. Not the preacher. Not the townsfolk who had watched her limp past them for weeks in silence. She ran, not far. Her leg wouldn't allow it, but far enough to leave behind the whispers and stares. The town blurred into nothing. The fields became bare hills, dry grass, wind. Snow began to fall, light at first, icy flakes melting on her cheeks as fast as the tears. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't go back. By sundown, she was on her knees. The wind howled through the canyon ridge, biting her fingers, freezing her shoes, stiff. Her scarf had fallen somewhere along the way. Her breaths came in ragged gasps. She knelt by a dying tree, limbs twisted like broken fingers, and let the snow coat her shoulders. She thought of her father, of the night he died, the glint of a badge, the thunder of the shot, of the stranger who had looked her in the eyes and left her kneeling in blood. And now here she was again, kneeling, frozen, alone. The crunch of boots startled her. She didn't look up. "Go away," and she rasped, but the boots didn't stop. They moved slowly, deliberately. Then, silence. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, just stood. Wind kicked up dust and ice between them. Finally, she looked. Nathan. He didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't offer her a hand. He just unwrapped his coat and set it gently over her shoulders. Then he sat beside her, not facing her, just facing the wind. They sat like that for a long time. I should have stayed gone, she whispered. Nathan was quiet, then said, "You didn't deserve that. I thought I could start over, be someone else. You're not someone else. You're just you." Clara scoffed bitterly. "You think that's enough?" "I think that's everything." The wind softened. The cold didn't leave, but it stopped biting. She turned to him. "Why'd you follow me?" He shrugged. "Didn't want to, just had to." "Because you're sorry for me?" "No." His voice was firm now. "Because I've been where you are. Different hill. Same kind of pain." She looked away. "I know what it's like to have a town turn on you," he continued. "To carry someone else's shame like it's your birthright." She said nothing. He added, "And I know what it's like to believe that leaving is the only way to survive." Clara's lips trembled. "Then why didn't you?" "I did. Once." He glanced up at the sky. "But there was nothing waiting for me on the other side." She shivered, not from cold, from truth. "I'm tired, Nathan," she whispered. "I know of being the wrong story in everyone's mouth. I know," her voice cracked. "I thought this was my chance. But maybe I'm cursed." "No," she blinked. "No," he repeated. "You're not cursed. You're just surrounded by cowards." He stood slowly and offered his hand. She didn't take it right away, but when she did, it wasn't because she needed saving. It was because she trusted him not to drop her. They returned to town the next morning just as the sun bled across the rooftops. People stared. Of course they did. Nathan walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, matching her step for step. The preacher was sweeping the chapel stairs. He paused as they passed. "Miss Clara," he started. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The look in her eyes said more than any prayer he could mutter. Inside Miss Felda's boarding house, her room was just as she left it. Scarf on the floor, curtains half open. She sat on the bed, hands shaking. Nathan stood near the window, watching. After a while, she said, "Why do you care?" He turned. "Because you do." That made her blink. He stepped forward. "You care enough to fight. To run, to cry, that means something. You don't even know me. I'm getting there." She stared at him, long and hard. Then, "You never said your last name." His jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. "Harlan." She went still. "Harlan," she echoed, the name falling like a stone into cold water. He nodded. Clara's hands balled into fists. "That was the name on the badge, the man who shot my father." Silence. He didn't deny it, didn't flinch. "I was there," he said finally. "I was a deputy. I didn't know who your father was, not then, not who he really was. We were told he was a killer, that he burned farms, killed children." She swallowed hard. He didn't. Nathan's voice was steady. "Then I owe you more than words." Clara shook her head. "You owe me the truth. And you'll get it." Outside, the church bell rang, once, twice. Not for a wedding, for a gathering. The sheriff had called a town meeting. Nathan looked toward the sound. "It's time." "For what?" she asked. He turned to her, voice low. "For the truth to stand its ground." Clara didn't sleep the night after the truth fell from Nathan's lips like a weight dropped into glass. "Harlan." She said it again in the dark, mouth barely moving. He had been there. He had pulled the trigger. Whether he was the one who ended her father's life or not, he carried the name, the badge, the memory. And yet, he hadn't run from it. He hadn't lied. He had found her in the snow, not to save her, but to sit beside her pain. That was worth something, maybe more than she'd ever had. By morning, the town stirred with talk, the kind that clung like smoke and slipped under every door. Some whispered about the sheriff's silence, others about the bride who hadn't walked the aisle. Delia Moore hadn't been seen since her outburst. and no one was eager to be the one to ask why. Nathan came back with 2 horses, a rough map, and a proposal that wasn't made on one knee. "There's land just past Widow's Creek," he said. "Not much, but it's free of names, debts, and ghosts. I say we build something that's ours." Clara stared at the map, fingers tracing the ridgeline. "You think they'll let us just ride out and start over?" He shrugged. "Don't care if they do." And strangely, neither did she. The days that followed weren't easy. Nathan bought wood with the last of his pay and bartered his badge for nails. Clara learned how to pack a horse with one leg that didn't always agree, how to hammer without, cringing at the noise, and how to breathe in a place that didn't constantly ask her to explain herself. Their shelter started as 4 posts, a roof, and fire. Then came walls, smoke from stew pots, and the faint scent of something Clara hadn't known in years, home. One night, Nathan found her standing outside, staring at the stars. Her hair blew wild, her cheeks red from cold. "Still thinking of running?" he asked gently. Clara shook her head. "No, just waiting to feel like I belong." He stepped beside her. "You do. You always did. It's the rest of them that forgot how to make room." Together they worked. Day by day, the land gave them its rhythm. Horses were brought in from a rancher 3 towns west, stubborn mares and one old stallion with a temper not unlike Clara's. She named him Flint. He bit her the first week. She still fed him apples every morning. Nathan taught her how to ride again. She taught him how to listen, not with ears, but with presence. Evenings were quieter, warmer. Firelight danced on rough log walls while he read letters aloud, and she mended shirts by the glow. There were no grand speeches, no perfect promises, just soft hands, shared silences, and eyes that met without flinching. But peace doesn't come without warning, and it doesn't stay without cost. It came one morning with hooves. 6 men on horseback, dust-covered, stone-faced, rode up the hill toward their cabin. One of them wore a badge, not Nathan's badge, Sheriff Elwood from Carson Ridge. He looked down at them like a man staring at a riddle he didn't want to solve. "Nathan Harlan," he called. "You're wanted for questioning." Clara stepped beside him before Nathan could speak. "For what?" Elwood glanced at her. "You his wife?" She lifted her chin. "I am. You ought to know the man you married was never cleared of that shooting. Your daddy's blood wasn't forgotten, and neither was the evidence that went missing." Nathan said nothing. His jaw was tight, his fists knotted at his sides. "I left that town," he said finally. "And the badge behind doesn't matter. Truth doesn't stay buried, Harlan, especially not when a man's daughter starts asking questions." Clara's heart froze. "I didn't ask anyone," Elwood shrugged. "Someone did. They gave him a choice, come quietly or be dragged." Nathan turned to her in the cabin as he packed. "Don't wait for me," he said, but Clara didn't answer. Instead, she reached beneath the bed and pulled out the worn box of letters, her father's old belongings, his handwriting, his badge, the one he'd left behind when he tried to walk away from outlaw life. "Take this," she whispered, pressing it to Nathan's chest. "It's time the truth spoke for itself." The trial wasn't in a court, but in a saloon backroom turned makeshift tribunal. 3 men from Carson Ridge, the new sheriff, and half a dozen locals who remembered the shootout like it had been painted on their porch walls. Clara stood when called, her leg throbbing, her throat dry. She told them everything. About her father, how he had tried to leave the gang behind, how he had changed his name and taught her to read beside a river, not a campfire. About the night he died, not in cold blood, but in a hail of confusion. About the badge she found in his coat pocket, the letter asking to surrender quietly. Nathan didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer defense. He simply said, "I believed what I was told, and I was wrong." The silence afterward wasn't approval, it was exhaustion. Old truths are heavy things. Eventually, the new sheriff waved a hand. "There's nothing more we can charge. Not after all these years." Nathan looked to Clara. Not relief, not triumph, just quiet thanks. They returned home 3 days later. The cabin was still standing. So was Flint. So was the fire inside. That night, Clara sat beside him under a sky washed in silver light. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "Dangerous habit," he murmured. "I came here to marry a stranger, to escape a shadow. But maybe I came to remember who I was before all of it." Nathan looked at her, eyes warm. "And who's that?" She smiled. "A woman who doesn't flinch from fire." He reached for her hand. "Then let's build one that never goes out." It was the church bell that brought them all together again. The same church that once echoed with silence when Clara had arrived, now rang out in the evening dusk, solemn and unsure, as if it too questioned what was about to unfold. The town gathered slowly. No summons had been sent, no flyers nailed to fences, and yet everyone came, drawn by the murmur of something unfinished. Clara stood at the edge of the steps, her hand resting on the weathered post. She wore no veil this time, no lace or lavender perfume, just her coat, her limp, her truth. And beside her, Nathan Harlan, his badge left behind in a drawer, his hands empty, his shoulders squared. He turned to her. "You sure?" he asked. Quiet like always. She looked past the gathering faces, the curious, the bitter, the regretful. Delia Moore stood near the back, her eyes cast down. Even she had come. Clara nodded. "I'm done hiding." Nathan stepped forward. 1 step, then 2. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't ask for silence. He just spoke. "My name is Nathan Harlan. You know it. You've spoken it over bar counters and behind doors. You know I've worn the badge. You know what I've done." He reached for Clara's hand and laced his fingers with hers. "What you don't know is this. I found peace in the woman you cast out. I found purpose in someone you called broken. And if any of you still believe she doesn't belong," he paused, "then I don't belong either." A hush swept through the crowd, not outrage, not applause, just the kind of stillness that comes when truth takes root. Clara looked out at them. She didn't flinch, didn't falter. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself. They didn't stay in that town, not for long. Some goodbyes are best left unspoken, like the snow that melts in spring without a sound. They packed light, left behind the cabin, the fire, and Flint, who found a new home with the schoolteacher, who never married and whispered softly to horses. Clara and Nathan followed the map again. Only this time, it didn't lead to vengeance or escape. It led to promise. To the edge of Dakota Territory, where the sky stretched wide and no one knew there. They bought a sliver of land near a winding stream, built a barn, planted wildflowers along the fence. He taught children to ride. She taught their mothers to stitch. And when the wind howled through the cracks of their new home, they held each other, not as fugitives from the past, but as architects of something real. One spring, a baby girl was born. They named her Laurel. Not after anyone lost, but after the leaves that survived fire and frost alike. Years passed. Not without sorrow, not without storms. But one winter night, Clara stood beneath a snowfall that softened the world into silence. Nathan stepped beside her, older now, his arm curled gently around her waist. "She's sleeping," he said. Clara nodded, then lifted, her face to the sky. "I used to think I was cursed," she whispered, "marked by a name, a limp, a memory." He didn't answer, just held her tighter. She leaned into him, but I wasn't. She smiled softly. "I was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow."